I got my first post-graduation job offer the same day I got my first tattoo, a skeleton key on my left hip. I had applied anywhere an application existed, and the desperation of not being employed after working for 4 years to be marketable left me saying yes, in my car, on the highway, to a job in Charleston, West Virginia. There was nothing about Charleston that really drew me, but in journalism, you take the jobs you get so you can get the jobs you want. You say yes because it's all part of something more. That's what they taught you in journalism school. You say yes. A few months later, I moved to Charleston, West Virginia, in the mountains, away from anybody I knew, living alone in an apartment on a mountain. I should have known there would be monsters lurking there. I started my job by signing paperwork presented to me on a television screen across a conference room. I couldn't read what I was signing very clearly, but I said yes. I was going to work for Sinclair Broadcast Group, a company that, not 2 weeks before, John Oliver had done a full expose on, citing the poor practices and bad behavior. More than one person sent me the warning clip. I met new people. Some I really liked. I made friends with the director, Bill, who's smart as a whip and sassy in that West Virginia way. He was kind and we talked often. I should call him and tell him I'm doing this today. A sports reporter who started just after I did, CJ, was pleasant. The first time I met him, he was wearing a walking cast, and it made him look even younger than he already was. I thought he was extremely good looking, but nothing came of that. I think he might be sleeping with an anchor now. The meteorologists and I got along well. I checked in with Jim and Brandon and sometimes Doug before each show, asking them how the weather was, and knowing that it was the intention of the conversation, not the filler before it started. I enjoyed learning about weather from their enthusiastic updates, and I was happy to schedule them the time they requested, not least of all because it filled time in the show, meaning slightly less work for me. There was Kevin, who had a schoolboy crush on me. He was sweet and wanted more, but it didn't feel right. Those were the good people I remember. There are other names that cross my mind, people who mean nothing to me now. Kaylee, Fallon, Corey, Ryan. There was Mamie, a big woman with a big personality and easily the most annoying voice I have ever heard in my life, which made it really confusing because they let her answer the phones. Mamie wasn't bad though. Others were. There was Chris the director, Chris the producer called Scraggs, and Chris the boss. A bastard, a drama queen, and a stooge, in that order. Chris the bastard was weak. He still is. I didn't know it when I met him though. Too much trust from having too few friends and allies. There was Jessica, there was Josh, both with egos the likes of which they didn't deserve working in West Virginia at Market 75. I loathed them both, and I still do today. There was my evening manager, a real bitch named Sarah. She once told me she needed my phone number because I had been away from the desk too long. I gave it to her in front of the newsroom, and she said she'd write it on the bathroom walls, implying with no uncertainty exactly what she thought of me. She didn't know I was a virgin. It was my first job. I wanted to prove my abilities in a place where people were mostly valued for following directions and sticking to the plan. I had been taught to be outgoing and ambitious and creative, but that is not what Sinclair wanted. Now, dear listeners, you may think that this is an anti-corporate manifesto, the story of the monster of big business, but you haven't even met the monster yet. There were the anchors, the weeknight ones, in my weekend and evening newbie shift, the leaders, the ones with their faces on billboards and website banners, the ones people knew by name in the area, small-time celebrities. I liked Whitney, but she was full of herself, the kind of beautiful woman who will turn you down before she even realizes you don't really like her that much. I didn't like Callie, and she was full of herself. A shrill, nasty type A new mom with an attitude to match and an air of self-importance that comes from money, not worth. There was Rick Lord. He was in his 40s, dark hair, brown eyes, with my sense of humor. I was immediately drawn to Rick Lord. He paid attention to me. We had similar sarcastic styles, and we would talk at work, probably too much, but he was careful. After a while, he approached me with a Twitter handle, Producer Schmaducer, at Wiener Dog Socks, another inside joke poking fun at Corey and his ridiculous clothing. I discussed it loudly in the newsroom at first, but I soon realized after a cutting look that it was meant to be for us alone. We would message back and forth, me using my personal Twitter account because he was not my secret. We talked about things and joked about things and asked for sexual images. He asked for sexual images. I was attracted. I was interested. I complied. I had never done anything like that before, 22 years old and what some would call a late bloomer. He told me exactly what he wanted. He knew. I kept my face out of the photos, but sometimes my fresh tattoo would show up. I adopted a puppy. I wanted him to meet her, and I wanted to watch forensic files with him while drinking wine, both things we had discussed our mutual interests in. He came over to my apartment late, after our 11 p.m. shifts ended. I was wearing pajamas post-shower. He had told me to shower. He brought nice wine and a charcuterie board that I would have never spent the money on. We sat on the floor in front of my futon and we turned on the TV. He spilled wine on my puppy's back, joking that she would now become an alcoholic. Dear listener, please know she is not an alcoholic. I was enamored with Rick Lord. I had been letting him in and letting him closer, and he was here. I was aware he wore a wedding ring, but I never asked about it. It could have meant any number of things, I told myself. His wife could be dead, his marriage could be open, he could be the father of 2 young sons with a woman who looked just like me. He could be the father of 2 young sons with a woman who looked just like me. If you're keeping score at home, dear listeners, it's now 3 sons. He had another after I was gone. I remind myself regularly now that I am not responsible for my partner's fidelity. If he's cheating, that's on him. That night, we kissed in front of the story of a grisly murder told with a narrator's 90s cadence. I kept one roving eye on my new puppy as he lifted me into his lap and placed his hands on my chest above the shirt below it, as he leaned me forward and undressed me, as he opted out of condoms. I was in shock and in love and unaware I had agency and that this wasn't what love was or what sex was, and that if I said no and he stormed off, that would have been a blessing. I didn't say yes. Thinking about it now makes me want to skin myself alive. We would message each other during work and after work and before work all the time. Always talking, always him breaking down my wall so he could build a bridge to cross. He would tell me to get up and go to a conference room. I would stand there in the darkness, my heart pounding, waiting for him and praying that nobody else would show up. We would hook up. I would be more excited to show him new things, like a shirt he could pull down by the shoulders. He was more excited about other things. We messaged all the time, talking about how he didn't plan to be an evening news anchor, how he had little ambition at all, but he liked sports, how he did drugs all through college. My closest friend Bill came over to see my puppy often, and we never really talked about Rick Lord, except when Bill would say he didn't like him. I'd agree, but only out loud. On a day I had off work, Rick Lord messaged me to come to a casino where he was hosting an event for the station. He told me to come and take photos for the social media account, something I normally did on the clock. But immediately I was dressed and out the door, grateful for a chance to see Rick Lord. Once there, he started introducing me to people. One man called me Brooke. I told Rick Lord, and he laughed, explaining that that was his wife's name. More messaging, more DMs, more photos. I asked him for a photo, one of his loosened necktie. That was the level of sexy I was ready for. We met up again, at my house. More wine, more snacks, more talking of Don Knotts' film, more robbery of myself and my autonomy. By then, though, I was thoroughly groomed. I wanted him to stay in my bed and close to me. He said he had to go home. It was 4 a.m., and his wife was home with 2 babies. I clung to the hope of seeing him alone as I grew more and more to hate my job, as Sinclair lived up, well, down to its name. Or I worked on football games as a field producer and a social media editor. I waited anxiously for the weeks when Rick Lord was the anchor on scene. I would hope we would drive together past billboards with his name and face on them. We would, and he would ask me for things. My heart would sink when he'd leave a game early because his family needed him. I selfishly wanted his family out of the picture. Things got worse. I got fired, called out of a morning meeting, and sent home. Rick Lord messaged me asking where I went. I leaned on him like he was the only thing that could keep me standing. Rick Lord tried to save my job, encouraging me to accept what was said about me, whether or not it was true, to grovel, to say yes to whatever they asked. None of it worked. I spent days in bed watching live-streamed reruns of cartoons, unable to move unless I heard my new puppy crying that she needed to go outside. I would take her out and go back to the spot on my bed where it was still warm from me. She deserved better. I wanted to die. I wanted to atrophy away in that spot on that bed. And I cut myself. A lot. Bleeding and crying and wishing that Rick Lord would come for me. He still messaged me from that godforsaken account. He became my reference on new job applications. I knew he was good at lying. Not too long after losing my job, but after an eternity of bleeding in my bed, I got ready to move home. I told Rick Lord. He said he wanted to see me before I left, and I was elated. I was going to tell him I loved him. He showed up with a pizza, banana peppers, and black olives. We ate it and talked about anything but what was coming. He got ready to leave, to go back to work. I hugged him around the neck, pulling him down close to me. I love you, I told him. I love you too, sweetie, he said, burying the knife in my chest. My parents came to help me move. They were frustrated, helpless, and horrified by the scars on my right arm. They didn't know the half of it. They still don't. I will never sit them down and tell them this. Rick Lord and I continued to talk after I moved home. Eventually, the conversation turned back to sex. That was the exact moment that I learned my worth to that man. I was hurt and angry and looking up his wife on Facebook, drafting messages after messages that I never sent. Your husband thinks we look a lot alike. Your husband took my virginity. Your husband is cheating on you. I was in love with your husband. I still think about messaging Brooke from time to time. And think about sending her a recording of this. But I won't. She'll have to find out on her own. I told you this story about a monster today because I know that Rick Lord came from somewhere. He's not the only one. There are plenty of hymns all over wielding power they don't deserve and destroying people and ruining lives. I deleted all the messages from him, blocked his number, and producer schmaducer. Life went on, and I started hooking up with people just to feel like I was the one in control. Since the first time was meaningless, why should anything subsequent matter? Some men were better. Most weren't. I sometimes hope Rick Lord is dead, that he's croaked and that his sons are growing up without a father because no father would be better than the one that they've been stuck with. 3 boys who could grow up to be men or monsters, depending on how much control he exerts over them. I check his social media accounts, the work ones, from time to time, hoping I might see an obituary. I'm not healed. I'm not over it. I'm not experiencing any kind of cathartic release right now. But I know with all the Rick Lords prowling this earth that I'm not alone.